The planet of Althar was a hostile place where violent storms frequently ravaged the land, and enormous beasts roamed the dense jungles, looking for their next meal. The air was thick with an orange haze, and the ground was jagged and uneven. The inhabitants of Althar, the Altharians, were a resilient species, but even they could not escape the dangers of their planet. One day, a small Altharian child found himself alone in the wilderness. His parents, members of a respected clan, had been lost in a storm. The young one, barely old enough to walk without stumbling, had no choice but to flee the danger of the beasts that roamed near the jungle's edge. But he was small and weak, unable to fend off the vicious creatures that lurked nearby. It was on that fateful day that a strange ship crashed nearby, the sound of metal tearing through the sky filling the air. The child, terrified by the roar of the ship's descent, hid behind a large rock, clutching his tiny body to the ground, hoping the beasts would not smell his scent. He had no idea that what was about to happen would change the course of his life forever. The ship, though damaged, had not been entirely destroyed. Its wreckage scattered across the jungle floor, sending plumes of smoke into the air. From the wreckage, a human emerged, covered in dust and bruised, but alive. His name was Captain Ryan Carter, a skilled space explorer who had been sent on a mission to survey distant planets. The Altharian planet was not part of his original plan, but the malfunction of his ship had forced him to crash land. Ryan had heard rumors about the Altharians before, stories of their cruelty and savage nature. But as he stumbled through the wreckage, his eyes caught sight of something far different. The frightened eyes of a child, no older than 5 or 6, trembling behind the rock. Ryan's heart softened at the sight of the small being. The child looked fragile, his blue skin bruised from the fall, his eyes wide with fear. Ryan knew he had to act quickly. He approached cautiously, extending a hand to the small alien. "It's okay," Ryan said softly, though he wasn't sure the child would understand. "I'm not going to hurt you." The Altharian child didn't move at first, his small body frozen in fear, but something in Ryan's voice seemed to reassure him. After a long moment, the child crawled out from behind the rock, his small arms shaking as he reached out to Ryan. Ryan scooped the child into his arms gently, his heart aching at the sight of the tiny creature's terror. The child's blue skin was cool to the touch, his pulse weak but steady. He was hungry, tired, and scared, but he didn't struggle in Ryan's arms. It was as though the child had given up hope and simply wanted comfort. "I'll get you somewhere safe," Ryan whispered as he started walking toward the remains of his ship. He knew that if they stayed in the open, they would be easy targets for the dangerous beasts that roamed Althar's jungles. As they made their way through the dense underbrush, the child's trembling body eventually began to relax in Ryan's arms. The strange, soothing cadence of the human's voice seemed to ease his fear. The child had no words to speak, but there was an unspoken bond that had already formed between them. Ryan knew the risks of being on this planet, but he also knew that saving this child was the right thing to do. As an explorer, he had seen many strange worlds, many hostile environments, and countless species, but this was the first time he had encountered an alien in such a vulnerable state. After a long journey through the forest, they reached the remains of Ryan's ship. The human was exhausted, but he had managed to gather some supplies, including food and water. He set the child down on the ground gently, then rummaged through the wreckage for something to help. The child watched him closely, his large black eyes following every movement Ryan made. When Ryan finally found a small food ration, he opened it and offered it to the child, who hesitated for only a moment before eagerly accepting it. The child's delicate hands shook as he ate, clearly starving, but Ryan didn't press him to talk or explain anything. He knew the child had been through a traumatic experience, and he respected the silence. For days, Ryan cared for the child, keeping him safe and sheltered as they waited for a rescue team. During this time, something unexpected happened. The child, once fearful and distrustful of Ryan, began to show signs of affection. He would reach for Ryan's hand, rest his small head on the human's shoulder, and even smile weakly when Ryan played with him. Ryan's heart swelled with emotion. He had always thought of aliens as distant, cold beings, but this child, this fragile soul, was so much like the humans he had known. He was just another living being, trying to survive in a harsh world. But there was one moment that stood out above the rest. One evening, as the sky darkened and the stars twinkled in the vastness of space, the child sat next to Ryan, gazing up at the stars. Ryan, sitting quietly beside him, watched as the child's small body trembled slightly. It was clear that the child was remembering the pain of losing his family, the fear he had felt when his home had been destroyed. Ryan placed a hand on the child's shoulder, offering a sense of protection and comfort. But then something unexpected happened. The child, unable to hold back his emotions any longer, let out a soft sob. His tears, unlike anything Ryan had ever seen, fell silently into the dirt. The child had never cried in front of Ryan before, always holding back his emotions as if trying to be strong. But now, in the safety of this human's presence, he allowed himself to mourn. His tears were not just for the loss of his family or his planet, but for the fear that had gripped him for so long. Ryan's heart shattered as he watched the child cry. He had never expected this kind of connection to happen, especially with an alien. But in that moment, he realized that this child, though not of his species, was just like any other vulnerable being who needed comfort and safety. The human reached out to the child, pulling him into his arms once more and whispered softly, "It's okay. You're safe now. I'm here." The child, still sobbing, clung to Ryan tightly. In that moment, there were no differences between them, no alien or human. There was only a bond that transcended species, a simple truth that no matter where you came from, everyone needed to be loved and protected. As the days passed, Ryan continued to care for the child, and eventually a rescue team arrived to take them both home. The human had saved the child's life, but in doing so, he had also saved something far more important, a connection between two different species that neither of them had ever imagined. And as the child looked back at the wreckage of his home planet, he knew one thing for certain: the kindness of one human had changed everything. End.